Greetings and salutations, my minions. Now, I think we can all applaud a new player when they start getting into role-playing, but what if they get really into role-playing, if you catch what I'm saying? Well, that, sadly, is what we're going to be exploring today. And before we get into the video, I've got an announcement. Many of you have seen the community post that went up on Wednesday, but for those that have not, a bunch of other creators and myself have put together a new YouTube channel specifically for D&D content, not D&D horror stories though. And the first real piece of content that we have planned is a one-shot amongst all of us, with Artificial DM being the DM. Makes sense given his name. And something we're doing that's going to be a lot of fun is having our communities make our characters. So the reason why I'm making this announcement is to announce that tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, I'll be going live on my Twitch channel so that we can have the chat create the character that I'm playing. And mind you, I'm sparing no expenses at giving you guys creative freedom. You can pick my race, class, subclass, you're going to be point buying for me, and you'll even pick my name when this is all said and done. I'm sure it'll be hilariously stupid, but that's kind of the fun of it. And what's also going to be taking place on tonight's Twitch stream is the Q&A video that I promised back about a month ago to celebrate this channel's 1-year anniversary, which we hit on, I think it was May the 23rd? Somewhere around there. But we hit our 1-year anniversary, and I promised to do whatever you guys voted on, and you all voted on a Q&A video, so that's going to be taking place on tonight's Twitch stream as well. And like the character creation, that's also going to be made into a VOD available to anyone on my Twitch channel. So links to both the Dice Goblin YouTube channel and my Twitch channel are in the description below. Be sure to check them out if you're interested. Anyhow, that's all for the announcements today, so let's roll for initiative and get on with the story. I'll start off by giving you all some context. I've always been interested in the storytelling aspects of RPGs. However, I haven't had the greatest of experiences when trying to get into traditional tabletop role-playing games, like Dungeons & Dragons and the like. Stories for another time, this is long enough as it is. So, around 7 to 8 years ago, while I was still in high school, some friends I met through World of Warcraft suggested that I could GM, if you can even call it that. A sort of a choose-your-own-adventure style session for them that was primarily focused on plot and roleplay. The actual mechanics were very simplistic, and pretty much only there to settle the occasional dispute, since the purpose of the whole thing was sort of a collaborative writing adventure, where the main focus was to tell a story with me acting as the story's narrator. To this day, I'm not sure whether they came up with the concept on their own, or if this style of play has an official name. They literally just called it a narrative RPG. I'm sure the more experienced among you can tell me whether that's a thing or not. And to the DM's point, there's probably several games out there that are like this. The first one that comes to my mind is Dungeon World, which I've not actually played it, but everything I've read makes it seem more with a narrative focus over a gameplay focus. So I'm throwing my hat into the ring there, but if you happen to know anything else, leave it in the comment below. I definitely want to check it out, and I'm sure everyone else is interested. Anyhow, let's continue. I've never been much of a role player, but I am, I'd like to think, a passable writer, especially considering that English isn't my first language. So, in spite of my reluctance, I eventually agreed to create a narrative for their characters. Given the rules-light nature of the game, a lot of the restrictions had to be enforced by the lore, and just general common sense. But I rarely had anyone going into business for themselves, since doing so would have been counterintuitive to everyone's enjoyment. There were ways to get your character killed if you really wanted to, sure, but I had no incentive to deliberately stifle anyone, nor did the players have any reason to go out of their way to pick fights they couldn't win. Overall, it was a surprisingly fun time, and it gave me a chance to flex my creative muscles. I started putting more and more effort into the world, crafting stories and adventures my players could choose to partake in, with different outcomes depending on their actions or inactions. That is, until a player I'll just refer to as Jane came along. Jane started as a new and pretty active member of the World of Warcraft guild my friends and I were a part of. She and one of said friends, henceforth referred to as Loverboy XXX, because he will read this and I'm feeling petty, had apparently grown close and were all up in each other's DMs. Nothing wrong with that. At some point, he had even told her about our group's weekly online sessions and invited her to join. I was officially introduced to Jane via voice chat and gave her a rundown of the setting, the current campaign's progress, and the general guidelines for designing her character. She seemed pretty receptive to it all, and was eager to join in on the party's adventures. even going the extra mile by making her first character my world's equivalent of a healer, so that the party, who were a tight-knit band of former cutthroats, had an incentive to bring her along. It created an interesting dynamic where Jane's sheltered character grew accustomed to the world at the same rate that she did, bringing some much-needed contrast to the party's composition. If I absolutely had to nitpick, I'd say that she liked playing the role of damsel in distress a bit too often for my liking, but no one else seemed to mind, so I refrained from commenting on it at the time. Without going into too much detail, the setting was a blend between traditional fantasy, Egyptian mythology, and Turkish folklore, where the party often had to leave the safety of the capital and venture into the untamed desert in search of long-forgotten tombs, treasure, and the like. Following the party's decision to side with the guards during an uprising, they were invited to the palace, where they were to meet and be congratulated by the royal family themselves for playing a pivotal role in subduing the rebellion. Pleasantries were exchanged and meaningless titles were granted before the party were sent back off to their base in the slums. If that sounds underwhelming, it's because that was the point. I was trying to establish how detached the nobles were from the plight of their subjects. Despite all of my efforts to write them as condescending dicks, one of the members of the royal family, who I'll just refer to as the prince for simplicity's sake, seemed to have left an impression on Jane's character. To clarify, the prince was the youngest of the king's sons, and the embodiment of narcissism. I wrote him to be as douchey and elitist as possible, which made the healer's sudden crush on him all the more baffling. Yes, I described him as very physically attractive, but that was literally his only redeeming quality, and there was no shortage of traditional attractive NPCs, and player characters surrounding her constantly if she really wanted to go down that route. That said, Jane's character was meant to be naive, so I figured her swooning over a guy that despises everything she represents could have been used as a highlight in her inexperience. Unfortunately, it was nothing as self-aware as that. Both in character and out, Jane kept bringing the prince up, much to the rest of the party's annoyance. She insisted that they fully align themselves with the crown in hopes of earning more favor, while simultaneously asking me when they were going to be meeting him again. As you can probably guess, Loverboy XXX was particularly and quite vocally against this for obvious reasons. Perhaps I should have been more stern in railroading them away from that entire plot point, but in my defense, I was really committed to adapting to everyone's choices. Jane got her way eventually, dragging everyone along with her and forcing me to come up with more and more stuff they could do for the local gentry. I made a point of clearly telling her that their efforts were appreciated, but it wasn't getting them any closer to another audience with the prince. Keep in mind that this was an NPC I hadn't even put that much thought into at the time, since I never really expected him to be anything beyond an entitled prick whose entire purpose was to symbolize the blatant disconnect between the common man and the ruling class. I could have and eventually did flesh him out more, but at the time, nobody apart from Jane cared about him enough to justify doing that. Loverboy XXX was getting pretty fed up by Jane's infatuation with my NPC, and out of character demanded that we move on to something else. I explained that I've been presenting them with different plot hooks this entire time, but instead they just kept catering to their healer's whims, who had pretty much assumed somewhat of a de facto leader role. If nothing else, the mental image of a ragtag group of hardened outlaws following around a teenage girl pursuing her crush was sort of amusing. Finally, picking up on the group's frustrations, Jane relented and we were allowed to move on to something else. It was at this point when Loverboy XXX's character started trying to get closer to Jane, which, while awkward at times, at least made more sense since they had a thing in real life. Both of their characters were of similar age and didn't interfere with my storytelling. Jane was open-minded to the idea, but didn't seem particularly excited about it. Her healer and his cutthroat continued with their in-character flirting through several campaigns, but their relationship never evolved past the occasional innuendo or remark. All was well until that fateful evening, when I saw that Jane had messaged me several times on Skype. When I opened our conversation, I saw paragraph upon paragraph of her, I'm assuming in character since most of it was surrounded by question marks, proclaiming her love for the prince, and straight up demanding to meet him again. It's been a long time, so I don't remember exactly what she said, but I distinctly remember her threatening to leave the friend group altogether if I didn't make it happen. She went on to guilt-trip me by saying that it should have been my fault if Loverboy XXX, I kid you not, killed himself over her leaving without a word, since she was apparently helping him battle through some mental issues none of us were aware of. I honestly had no idea how to react. I remember just sitting there, reading through her messages, and trying to formulate some sort of adequate reply in my head. Eventually, I settled on the worst thing I could have probably done. I proposed to narrate a private, non-canon exchange between her healer and my NPC. Obviously, she agreed and was pretty enthusiastic about it, as though she hadn't threatened my friend's mental health in order to get her way. I have no excuse for choosing to indulge her instead of immediately talking to Loverboy XXX about the whole thing. I guess I was both worried about him and scared of our friend group disbanding, which eventually happened anyway, but over an unrelated incident. Fast forward to the day of my private session with Jane. The scene opened with the prince standing on a balcony, overlooking the royal gardens, and her character being invited into his quarters. I obviously knew what she was after, so I made up some BS reason as to why he had taken a sudden interest in her. I don't remember what it was, exactly. Both expressed their inexplicable infatuation with each other, and things obviously got heated. So I hurried to fade to black, but Jane wasn't having it. She was basically expecting me to ERP with her, something I had never done and had no interest in doing. I explained to her that, at that time, I wasn't really interested in exploring naughty stuff both in and out of character. Cue the explicit images. That's right, folks. Jane seemed to have thought that all I needed was some inspiration, and so, in her infinite wisdom, proceeded spamming me pictures and gifs of explicit acts she wanted my character to do to hers. Then, she went on to make the whole thing 10 times weirder by expressing how this sort of content was making her feel. Though both of us were 18 at the time, I still don't feel comfortable recounting her exact words verbatim. Let's just say she was making me increasingly uncomfortable, until she left me no choice but to tell her off, which she took as well as you'd expect. She left the group soon after and blocked all of us, including Loverboy XXX, who took it hard, but got over it after confiding in the rest of us instead. Not sure what Jane has been up to since then. I had seen her mentioned in passing a few times before our World of Warcraft guild got disbanded for good, since most of us moved on to other games and hobbies. Apparently she is currently married, so I genuinely wish her all the best, and hope that she has grown as a person since the above-mentioned incident. Only recently did me and Loverboy XXX reconnect, who you can thank for reminding me about Jane and directing me to this subreddit. It's a mildly uncomfortable experience at best, compared to the other stories I've read on here, but I thought it might still be worth sharing. End post. OP, that was definitely worth sharing. She had a few screws loose, to say the least. But like you said, hopefully she's grown as a person. As you said, the very worst thing you could have done is do that one-on-one session. I probably, as much as the other players would not have liked it, tried to weave it into the actual story, and I likely would have pulled them aside and explained that that's what we were doing, because she threatened to quit the game otherwise. And who knows, maybe everyone at that point in time would have agreed to just kick her and avoid the problem altogether. You know, get people talking behind the scenes a little bit, and maybe gauge exactly where Loverboy XXX's mental health was, because I suspect she may have been lying in order to push the OP to do what she wanted him to do. And as a few comments pointed out, maybe she actually had a crush on OP. Well, according to him, all of this was in character, and she really didn't talk or do anything with him out of character. So, in his opinion, she probably didn't have a crush on him, but we'll really never know. Anyhow, that's it for today's story. As I said earlier, be sure to check out the Twitch stream tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, and to follow both that channel, and subscribe to our new Dice Goblins YouTube channel to see how our new D&D content goes. Anyways, the source of the video is in the description below, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more videos just like this one, be sure to hit that subscribe button and bell notification icon next to it in order to be notified of my future videos. And while you wait for said future videos, here are a few related videos that you can watch from my channel in the meantime.